are these people?
Let's talk about Kamala going to Africa, shall we?
Sure.
So I'd rather not, but because Africa is very special to me, we must talk about it.
Yeah.
But so let's play this first. So CBS did a very brief segment on her traveling there. So we'll watch that, have an article to kind of go through, and then, as I said, we're going to have a familiar person who I've referenced before have some things to say regarding, the US Africa Summit, which took place back in November, and the implications of that in relation to Kamala being in Africa now. So, Reef, if you don't mind playing
No.
first.
This. Oh, I get to do my new thing.
Yes, you
Rob,
get to do
we
the
have a
new
new
thing.
thing. So usually with things like this, even though we're completely using it under fair use, CBS doesn't like us playing their videos, or NBC or MSNBC or anything like that. So I decided to go back in time, before the days of copyright. Just like this. Look at that. How about that? Isn't that nice?
It is.
Isn't that nice?
You're a genius.
I hope so.
We'll
You
see.
know.
Vice President Kamala Harris is in Ghana today as part of a week-long visit to Central Africa.
The vice president will also travel to Tanzania and then Zambia as U.S. continues to expand its ties with the continent.
Harris's visit is meant to focus on economic development, climate change, food security, and a rapidly rising youth population in Africa. She spoke highly of Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo and expressed her excitement to discuss the future of the continent with him and its other leaders.
We will build on the previous meetings I have had with each of them to strengthen democracy and good governance, promote peace and security, build on long-term economic growth, and strengthen our business ties.
CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now, not from there, but from the White House. Scott, is Harris's visit a direct response to China's recent investment and growing influence in the continent?
Yeah, well, the vice president was asked just that question during a joint press conference with President Akufo-Addo a few moments ago, and she said, no, that this is a strategic issue for the U.S. to develop a relationship with Africa amid concerns about security and in the name of building stronger relationships worldwide. But this isn't just a pivotal moment in U.S.-Chinese relations. This is a seminal moment, and China has been investing deeply in Africa, building billions of dollars of new infrastructure, providing resources for African nations as China keeps an eye on all the natural resources available in Africa. In the U.S., making its own investment to foster a stronger relationship during what is clearly a tenuous moment, not just in U.S.-Chinese relations, but Tony and Lilia, tenuous moments in the African economies, including in Ghana, where COVID-19 ravaged their economy, hurt with jobs, hurt with inflation, and the Ukraine war with Russia is starving resources from Africa as they try to develop big industry. So this is a pivotal moment for the vice president to be there.
Well, so I'm going to be curious to know, and this is a tough to answer, but I'll put it out there anyway. Would we be making this trip, our government, the Biden administration, in the absence of China making such a push itself for influence in the region?
Yeah, it's a good open-ended question, but let's add Russia to this as well, with Russia also having a foothold in Africa. Economically and strategically, it's also a pretty pivotal moment for U.S.-Russian relations. But it's also important to note that the former president's critics, former President Trump's critics, say he damaged these relationships by making a vulgar reference to African nations in 2018, and it's incumbent, as critics would say, on the Biden administration to rebuild those bridges, figuratively, and rebuild those relationships.
All right, Scott MacFarlane, thank you for taking the time.
That was fucking terrible, dude.
Son of a bitch. Rob, I know you have comments.
God.
Dude, there's so many jokes. Like she couldn't have been more patronizing if she were wearing a kente cloth going out there. She goes and she starts going with this long run-on sentence she speaks like Obama, where she's like putting all these like flowery words out there. And it's painful to watch. I actually made a joke on Twitter when I heard this was happening. I was like, this is a really, really good way to speed up Africa-China relations. It's just to send Kamala Harris over there because she's just going to embarrass everybody. And if I may, I'm going to go on substance here. She's talking about how, we can improve our relationship. And she talks about security there, which I'll tell you what she went and did. She doesn't go down there the same way the Chinese do and say, listen, how can we help you with your infrastructure? What do you need that we can help you with our trading apparatus? She goes down there and she goes, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You're going to install a bunch of these multinational corporations that operate out of the US in your country. Otherwise, we're going to do to you what we did to Libya. And we all know what happened there. By the way, and then last comment there, that's why I was laughing about the Trump thing. It's like, oh, well, these, of course, the relations with Africa were totally, screwed up because Trump was talking about how they're shithole countries or whatever, completely glossing over the obvious fact that like Libya happened under Obama.
Don't be
so
right.
It's like, yeah, right. So it's like it's weird. That guy, the really super, like cartoon white guy that was trying to explain all this. Of course, he's going to go in there and he's going to somehow shoehorn Russia and Trump into his answer.
But funny how he mentioned that Russia is basically starving Africa.
Uh-huh.
Wait, do you remember a certain article that I referenced last week?
Yes.
That is not the case.
Yeah.
If anything, Russia
they've been helping that. They've been, yeah.
So check
flat
that clip.
Out,
wrong.
Just wrong. Like,
yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna tear. I guess the same as Scott. I'm gonna tear him one within the next few minutes. So anyway, so Politico also reported on this. This is written by Eugene Daniels, where he talks more specifics regarding Kamala Harris's tour in Africa. And he writes, and let me catch this up. Sorry. There we go.
There you go.
For Vice President Kamala Harris's first trip in office to Africa, the goal is nothing less than a resetting of relations between the United States and the countries she's scheduled to visit. Fearing that China has gained a huge economic foothold on the continent, the Biden administration is trying to not just loosen that grip, but encourage more American businesses to invest in African nations. Harris's arrival Sunday marks the latest, most high-profile effort to achieve those ends. She is the fifth top Biden administration official to visit Africa this year.
Fifth? Okay.
That's not including Biden, who hasn't gone over there yet. She is the fifth top Biden administration. UN Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen came in January. First Lady Jill Biden visited in February, and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken made the trip earlier this month. President Joe Biden plans to visit later in the year. Geez, within the last 3 months, we've had 5 administration representatives have visited the continent. Gee, I wonder what's going on. Anyway, in Ghana, Harris's primary focus is on elevating the nation's youth, and she noted the median age of Africans is 19.
But why did she go see Rosario Dawson and Idris Elba there? Why was that part of the... Anyway, continue.
What that tells us about the growth of opportunities, of innovation, possibilities, I see in all of that great opportunity not only for people of this continent, but for people of the world. What does that mean? Harris told a crowd of dignitaries, dancers, drummers, and school children who had greeted her. But Ghana isn't her only audience. Harris will also spend time in Tanzania and Zambia over her 7 days on the continent. She'll hold bilateral meetings with the leaders of each of the free nations, visit Ghana's Cape Coast slave castle, and make announcements about public-private sector investments. The trip is intended to make good on the administration's commitments from December at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, which we
covered. Not that great.
But extensively.
Extensively give us your resources and get nothing for it was essentially, if I remember correctly. Okay.
But for Harris, the first Black U.S. Vice President, it also carries especially high stakes. Her task will be to convince the African nations that the United States wants to truly invest in the future of countries here and help change the narrative for Americans and encourage more business incentives. For decades, the perception of the U.S. has been that it treats African countries like charity cases, according to several regional experts. That was exacerbated during the Trump administration, which largely ignored the continent or reportedly disparaged it. Former President Donald Trump in the 2018 meeting referred to some African nations as shithole countries. At the time, China enhanced its investments in Africa, helping to build roads and other infrastructure projects and creating firmer economic and political relations. Washington is playing catch up with Africa, said Cameron Hudson, a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies Africa program. With all the business investment that the Chinese have made comes a lot of leverage and political influence in those countries. It's not just them making money there, it's that they now have skin in the game in Africa in ways that we don't. And that gives them leverage that we don't have. So basically saying a quiet part out loud, basically being like, we want some of what China is doing. But experts say the Biden administration has an opportunity to now compete with China as more African leaders see their relationship with China as a new form of exploitation, said H. Peter Ham, the former special envoy of the
Sahel region.
It's kind of blurry there, so thank you. Region of Africa during the Trump administration. A lot of Africans have woken up to realize how often in these large construction projects, infrastructure, they don't employ Africans. They even ship in their own labor oftentimes, Pham said. Which I will say is true. Having lived there, it is true. That being said, I have to argue, what is the US going to do that's any better than the Chinese? If anything, it'll be just more of the same shit of, yeah, we'll put in the infrastructure in this country, but we're going to hire our own people in the continent to do the work in lieu of the African labor that's already there. That's what I'm going to guess is more likely going to happen if they go follow through, or if these countries kind of go along with whatever platitudes that Kamala will kind of give them in terms of, relationship, or in this case, whatever you want to call it, like democracy, relationship, whatever they want to say as a means to kind of infiltrate Africa and its resources.
But
anyway.
Anything to add, Rob? Or is Collin just wanting to steamroll?
No,
go ahead.
No. I don't really have much to add. I think you're exactly right. If the United States gets their way, is they'll just have a bunch of multinational corporations come in and build that infrastructure, but they're not going to build roads. They're going to build McDonald's and Starbucks, and then they'll,
ways for us to make money. Yeah.
And the reason they bring up this, like that the Chinese are going to bring in cheaper labor than they would normally pay the African. That's exactly what would happen with the US as well, except for the Chinese are going to come in and build all sorts of infrastructure because they believe that if you help out a people and you build literal inroads with them and build bridges with them, that they'll be good trading partners and it'll help you economically in the future. Whereas the United States just does it at the behest of whatever multinational corporation wants to exploit the resources there. I don't know if you guys have ever, and I won't go down this rabbit hole too far, but like 1954 Guatemala, the United Fruit Company, basically they controlled the entire country. They controlled all the politicians, and it was basically because of the exports of bananas that they had a monopoly on, and it turned out horrible for the workers. They actually killed a bunch of striking workers with their police force. It was nasty. So they want, if the US goes in there and builds infrastructure, it's at the behest of some sort of, multinational corporation, and that won't end well for anybody.
Banana Republic, right?
Exactly right. Yep, that's exactly right.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's continue.
Yeah, you need to do that. So I have to show you the thing, and then you can. That's how it works.
I
right?
had to pin your screen. The Biden administration has tried to paint its Africa policy as one based in long-lasting relationships instead of a larger move to counter China and choke off economic support for Russia. But administration officials acknowledge that those global rivals do not factor into their view of current U.S.-Africa policy. Obviously, we can't ignore the current geopolitical moment. It's no secret that we are engaged in competition with China. And we said very clearly we intend to outcompete China in the long term, said a senior administration official who spoke on a call with reporters ahead of the trip. Harris's visit, the official said, is intended to prove that America has an affirmative agenda for the continent, one that change the tenor of the relationship. And it's funny that they don't go into any specifics at all as to what they are going to offer. You know,
also, why can't it be like the soprano of the relationship or the baritone of the tenor of the okay, I mean, seems very non-inclusive, Politico. God.
I think I have a little more to this.
Yeah.
In her remarks to the African Leaders Summit in December, Harris previewed a message she expected to lean in over the next week, that the administration would create partnerships across the continent grounded in candor, openness, inclusiveness, shared interests, and mutual benefits, and all this bullshit, and not a whole lot of. And overall, our administration will be guided not by what we can do for Africa, but what we can. Oh, God. My head hurts. Or like, what did she say?
It's just the double CK the entire time. That's all it is.
Let me read this again. Like, and overall, our administration would be guided not by what we can do for Africa, but what we can do with Africa. Which is what?
And when she says that, she means literally like using them as a tool. That's what she's. What we're gonna do.
Yeah.
We're gonna grab Africa and do with it what we want.
Oh God.
Yeah, she's right about the candor, though. It's the candor of somebody who's been drinking since 9 a.m.
American businesses do not see Africa in economic terms. Who the fuck told you that? Who? What? Like,
I have a theory on why they sent all of these officials, and this is not a joke. I saw today that Kenya is dropping the petrodollar.
Yes.
So, and then I also saw something, and this isn't Africa, but it has a lot to do with the petrodollar as well, is that China and Brazil have agreed to do all of their transactions between each other and all their trading outside the petrodollar.
Right.
So what is actually happening, I think the U.S. understands that in Africa, there's going to be a domino effect. Very much starting with, I think now Kenya, you'll see a couple other countries kind of follow suit where they're all playing with the idea of ditching the petrodollar, but they got to do it kind of as one because they don't want to end up like Libya. That's what happened with Libya. Gaddafi was trying to create the dinar to be like an African currency, and look what they did to him, right? So I think that the United States understands that within the next couple of months, I think multiple African countries are going to start making moves to drop the petrodollar, right?
Right. With
exactly.
With BRICS making sure that they're going to be gold backed and not like,
yes,
while also brokering deals with Saudi Arabia, Iran, like,
yes,
you know,
the writing's on the wall, and the African nations, they see it, the rise of China. And here's the thing, man, it's very hard to like mend these bridges that the United States has burned over the last 50 years or 100 years. You know, they've cooed many of these countries. They've destabilized multiple of them. So how are you going to mend these bridges? I'll tell you, they don't go there and they're not trying to make a deal the way that China's trying to make a deal, trying to help out the countries. They're going down there and they're going wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You try to drop the petrodollar like Gaddafi did, and you'll end up like Gaddafi. That's right. What they're going to do. And that's what I think Kamala Harris is down there doing right now. And it's not going to work. If anything, it'll accelerate Africa-China relations. Oh, yeah. And that's not the worst thing in the world, because without going too far down the rabbit hole, one of the best things that can happen this very second is for the petrodollar to lose a lot of its value, because you can't fund World War III with a dead currency. Right. So if BRICS can actually play this waiting game and the Chinese and the Russians are very, very patient, and they can kind of wait out the United States and keep making these deals, eventually the petrodollar is going to collapse, and then they can avoid World War III because Raytheon's not going to take their payments in a dead currency. So long story short, I think that Kamala Harris is down there basically kind of threatening them in a way.
Yeah. So actually, let's skip ahead, Reef. I got it. So Rob, I want to introduce you to somebody. So well, who we're going to hear right now is Dr. Arikana Chimamori-Quao. She is the former representative of the African Union to the U.S. She's based in Zimbabwe now. But she actually kind of talks about a little of what you mentioned in terms of, you know, what Africa should be doing. But actually I've wanted to play this for a while, but I kind of sat on it, but I think it's very appropriate here. So she actually goes into a little bit of, well, this is a long clip, so I split it up. But what she's going to go into here is, as we mentioned, the US-Africa Summit was over in December. She had some thoughts, which also kind of relates to what we're talking about, what Rob, you've mentioned. So we're going to hear the first part where she talks about the US-Africa Summit in particular and what this administration has to get right in terms of their relationships with Africa.
And it sounds to be, I mean, I think there was a lot of criticism of the last summit like this under President Obama, that there was like no follow through. And, you know, it's one of the big questions I'm asking is, how do you make a big bang summit where everyone comes over? It's like checking off the box and say, okay, we've done Africa, now we can move on to other things. How do you make that something that's a more sustainable and a more continuous engagement of the United States with Africa? And what I'm hearing from you is, frankly, a lot of disappointment and you know, a lot of pessimism about what may come out of this summit.
Well, the point of the matter is, already you know nothing is going to come out of it because it is a one-sided conversation.
Right.
Where is the agenda? The agenda should have been published way in advance. The African leaders should have been given an opportunity to also state their position so they can come up with an African position that can then be discussed alongside the American position. So the fact that it is a one-sided conversation, that is yet going to be another useless meeting with no outcomes. But again, I'm going to keep emphasizing, the reason this is happening is because there is a disrespect for the Africans. There is a general feeling that we don't need to hear from the Africans. Their opinions do not matter. That wherein lies the problem. Why were the Africans not consulted? Why were the Africans not part of an agenda? Why was there not even an agenda like what happened during the FOCAC meeting with China? Those are some basic issues. No head of state. President Biden would not pick up and go to meet with any other leader in the world without an agenda. That simply doesn't happen.
Right.
So what makes the US think that they can engage African leaders without an agenda? Come to Washington, let me tell you what I want to do for you. Come to Washington, let me tell you what you need to do in your countries. That game is an old game.
Right.
It's not going to work anymore. To be honest with you, if I'm to speak the truth, I hope a lot of heads of states don't come because it is an insult. It is an abuse of the African leaders. It's a disrespect of the African leaders. Where is the agenda? Please respect the African leaders. Do unto them what you would want done unto you. So it's really a simple ask.
Let me ask you a question. You mentioned China and how China approaches this. I'm interested in what China gets so right. But is there a blind spot there? Are there problems in the China-Africa relationship from your perspective?
Let me just hit the nail in the head and deal with the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
Racism as well plays a very important part. The disrespect of the Africans also goes back to a lot of the people who work in the US government, not all of them, but there's a significant of them who automatically assume that Africans do not know what they're doing. Africans need help. Africans need to be told what to do. And racism is also at the bottom of it all. We need to address the individuals who are going to be visiting Africa, engaging Africa, They must understand that Africans are equal to them. But when one goes to Africa with a sense of superiority, wherein lies the problem, because you are not going to engage those leaders who are going to come to the table as equals. You go in feeling superior, you come back feeling superior. That is not an issue with the Chinese. The Chinese are coming in. The Chinese, yes, if you don't negotiate with them and they win the game, then that's your fault. But they don't come in feeling superior. They understand that Africa has something they need. So they will come to the Africans. They will come and make sure that they let the Africans know that you matter to us, that our relationship with you does matter. That you don't get that feeling with the United States. You get the feeling that there's this sense of superiority, that you Africans, you ought to be glad that we are engaging you. You ought to be glad that we're inviting you to come to Washington. That sense of superiority,
I mean,
it has to...
colonialism all over again.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah. And I've said this before. It's just neo-colonialism part two. Part two for whatever you want to name it. But yeah, that's kind of the feeling. And I'm glad that Dr. Avikana kind of calls that out. It's like, it's not genuine, in my opinion, of why all these administration figureheads and Kamala now going over. It's not in the sense of, you know, diplomacy or democracy, as they say. It's to say to them, we know better than you. We're going to take over. We're going to create the infrastructure in your countries. And you do not know any better. And we're just going to take your resources, and then you're going to have to deal with it. And the sad thing is, and we mentioned this in the US-Africa Summit, the leaders there are going to go along with it. Because at the end of the day, they're looking to enrich themselves at the expense of the people that they're supposed to lead. So kind of like the stereotypical, you know, Africa, you know, leaders, you know, are basically corrupt. Well, you can argue a lot of that is based upon the West and their relationship with the West and how much corruption they kind of bring in too. So, but yeah, I think I just wanted to play that just to kind of give an African perspective, you know, to all of this. Again, Dr. Avikana was talking in regards to the US-Africa Summit, but again, she kind of mentions this in terms of post, you know, what she expects or hoping to expect coming
from
out of that
leaders coming here, right?
And she basically said, you know, I'm not.
Well, what you told them.
Do not come.
That's what you told them.
Yeah.
I'm gonna come.
I do want to. I actually skipped a clip, but I think it's okay. No, I think it's okay.
Cool.
I have the meat that I really wanted to show.
You're over-prepared?
A little bit, but I think, you know, but I think it's a worthwhile interview to listen to anyway. It's about 25 minutes. So I'll link it in the description after this. But on the next slide, and I think this is kind of the crux of what I want to kind of get to, is she talks about how Africa can take advantage of all of this. And so I'm just going to let her tell it, and we can discuss after that.
The people.
Talk to me a little bit about how Africa can take advantage of its intellectual connection and assets to entrepreneurs who have left but may want to help Africa back, because this is one of your major initiatives.
Absolutely. The brain drain that started over 400 years ago, when the best and the brightest and the fittest were taken out of Africa forcibly, and that is when the brain drain started. I want to make sure that is very clear. And when we talk about African diaspora, we're talking about all people of African descent living outside of Africa. Let's be very clear. African Americans, they are Africans who were forcibly taken out of Africa, plus the continued brain drain, those who are later immigrants who left Africa running away from famine, from wars, in search of greener pastures. The end result is, as we speak, Africa has a serious deficit of expertise. Right. However, the good news for Africa is that we have a very young, intelligent, vibrant population that need opportunities. So when we can marry the age group of young, intelligent Africans with the expertise coming from the diaspora, we can see an Africa that can propel itself to take its rightful place on the world stage like it once was. So yes, the diaspora are an important component of Africa's development. Make no mistake about that. All the African leaders are fully aware of that. All the African leaders are in full support of coming up with programs to make it easier for the diaspora to move back. We want to look at diaspora who can come to Africa, not just focus on a country that you were born in, but if you are a person of African descent, Africa should matter to you. Africa should be your problem. You must own Africa's problems, understand it, and participate in the development of Africa. For when we have a stable Africa, it now also correlates with an African American who is anchored. It correlates with an Afro-Caribbean who is anchored. It correlates with an Afro-Latino who is anchored. Currently, descendants of the formerly enslaved, they are like a ship without an anchor. The wind blows that way, here they go. Until they are anchored by being accepted by Africa, until they are anchored by participating in the development of Africa. The Jews do it, the Chinese do it, the Indians do it, the Irish do it, African Americans together with the continental Africans. We must make sure that we work together to participate in the development of Africa, because the development and the building of the Africa we want, it is our responsibility first and foremost, and ours alone. Others are welcome to come join us. Others are welcome to help us. Others are welcome to engage us as equal partners, but we must own the building of the Africa that we want as a united front of the African diaspora.
So, in other words, seize the means of production, right?
Yeah, don't say that too loud. Don't say that too loud. That's quiet talk. You say that quietly. You know? Don't we talk about that? You got to read books that are banned to learn that. You know?
But I think she brings up the point, and actually that last clip is really the reason why I'm here, essentially, is the idea of, you know, us in the diaspora, instead of all these politicians going over who do not have the best interests of the people at heart, are looking to exploit the continent more, who are looking to, you know, who are in the pocket of lobbyists and the big banks and organizations that ultimately want to have more of a foothold in Africa and ultimately kind of push China and now Russia out of the continent in lieu of enriching themselves. What Dr. Africana is saying, look, you know, and I say this too, but I think obviously relatively, like if you're Black in the West, relatively, you have more opportunities here in a way that many people in Africa don't. And as we mentioned, and what was mentioned in the article, is Africa is young. So like the median age, depending on the country, is around 15 to 20. So it's a young population who, I'd argue, are very more involved. They're a little more internet savvy, and they are more willing to, at least in my experience, to be more open to different ideas and different way of doing things. But the problem is people like me are not necessarily going over there and talking to them. Who they're seeing is usually more white people who are usually more of a capitalist bent, who are looking to go over there and kind of take refuge in their countries and are essentially stealing the resources away to kind of benefit people here at the expense of the Africans who have essentially let them in their countries. That really should be people in the diaspora. So like if you're Black, if you're from Europe, Latin America, here, wherever, that should be our job to kind of step in with the experience and the tech expertise that we have to help build that infrastructure in Africa. So that's what she was saying, which I definitely relate and resonate with. So, and that's kind of my issue with China and Russia to a degree. It's not, and I've said this many times on this show, it's not that I'm necessarily pro or anti-China or Russia in terms of what's happening in Africa. I'm more pro-Africa in the sense of they have the issue of they have the resources, they need the development to do that on their own. And that's what this should be, the primary focus should be.
Yeah, I think China has, they're trying to build a big round table where they try to bring everybody in as kind of equals in the Belt and Road Initiative. So they will help build out infrastructure, but I think their main goal is just to give a lot of these African countries what they really need and ask them what they need so that they can be as prosperous as possible, because it helps everybody, including China, as trading partners. So I think that they will ultimately, most of the African nations will lean towards what China is offering. And to your point earlier, you said a lot of the African leaders they could end up getting bribed in a way by, the United States. That might work. But remember, the United States has this long track record of causing bloodshed and cooing and destabilizing. You're going to still get a lot of these leaders to say, you can't buy me off. We're getting off the petrodollar. We're just going to join China because we already know what a deal with the devil looks like.
Right.
So,
I think
yeah.
I think it depends on the country, and I think it depends on the politician over there.
Yes, of course.